fluid like the human body. So with that new technology, we're able to make figures almost look just like us. Sometimes even better.
Today, the Magic Kingdom's AAs populate dozens of attractions. From shows like the Hall of Presidents, where Abe Lincoln still stands and talks.
For 1,000 generations, rejoice.
To adventures like the Jungle Cruise. Each attraction is a precision-timed combination of soundtrack, which includes music, dialogue, and sound effects, and AA motions. The complex animated characters are controlled by the Digital Animation Control System, or DAX. It's located in climate-controlled rooms in the tunnels beneath the Magic Kingdom. Electrical cables that run through the tunnels connect the programs to the shows, enabling technicians to run the shows from a remote location.
Each one of these is a flash memory card that contains all of that data in a non-moving and non-volatile format, so there are no moving parts. As the chip plays, it hands off to the next one, and then hands off to the next one, and so forth, until we have a complete message. We're able to patch into the cards to monitor their performance.
Rap on a table. It's time to respond. Send us a message from somewhere beyond.
Today, a small army of audio animatronic characters populates the Magic Kingdom, some 1,100 in all. It's the kind of creativity and technology Disney's Imagineers would put to work yet again when they tackled their next park. Coming up, building the world's first geodesic sphere and the technology behind Disney's cutting-edge fireworks displays. Disney's audio animatronic figure, Lucky the Dinosaur, has traveled the globe, making visits to California, Orlando, and Hong Kong. Modern Marvels, Walt Disney World will return in a moment. Epcot is a 300-acre park with two very distinct personalities. One side is a futuristic world dominated by the 180-foot-tall spaceship Earth, one of the biggest geospheres anywhere on our geosphere. At the other end of the park, 11 foreign pavilions ring the World Showcase Lagoon. Given Disney's history with World's Fairs, it's no coincidence.
Epcot is a permanent World's Fair, if you will.
When Disney Imagineers broke ground on Epcot in 1979, they were once again launching the biggest construction project in the United States. 3,000 designers, 22 construction companies, 500 subcontractors, and more than 10,000 workers took on the job. Much of their labor went into constructing Spaceship Earth, a ride inside a giant sphere that was much more challenging to build than the castles that anchored Disney's other parks.
Epcot was a world theme, and we wanted to somehow express that. And so a sphere, looks like the globe of the world, much more so than a golf ball, as it's been called from time to time. But it's a very fascinating, complicated building.
Spaceship Earth is the world's first geodesic sphere. Its outside surface is 150,000 square feet, and its inside volume is 2,200,000 cubic feet. The giant sphere is held up by 6 legs, each of which is supported by pylons driven 120 to 185 feet into the ground. At its lowest point, the sphere stands 18 feet off the ground.
We actually hired MIT to engineer and to test the wind loads to make sure that it wouldn't become underneath there a wind tunnel that would knock people over.
The sphere is made of more than 11,000 triangles of alucobond, a thermal polyethylene core bonded to aluminum. 1-inch spacing between the panels allows them to expand and contract in the Florida heat. The spacing also prevents the sphere from becoming a huge waterfall when it rains. Water flows between the panels into a gutter system that empties into the World Showcase Lagoon. But Spaceship Earth is hardly the only engineering marvel in Epcot. Connecting Epcot to the Magic Kingdom is Disney's most famous and futuristic mode of transportation, the monorail.
People still look to the monorail as sort of a vision of future transportation. Visualize a bus on a highway and it had wheels on the bottom. Then you put that up on a concrete road in the sky, and maybe it's 2 feet wide. So you take some other wheels and you put them on the side of this concrete road. That keeps it upright.
Disney didn't invent the monorail. It was first patented in the 1820s in Great Britain. But Walt gave the monorail a futuristic makeover.
You remember the Buck Rogers rocket ship, where it had a long pointed front? It had these splayed fins along the side like ski runners, but it had this big wraparound windshield and little portholes, and I thought, that's it. That's all we got to do is do that shape and it'll hide the wheels. Sketched it up real quick, came in, made a bigger drawing of it, then a rendering of it. Walt took one look at the rendering and said, can you build that?
They could indeed. The original Disneyland monorail, which gave its first ride to Vice President Richard Nixon in 1959, ran on a track only 4,200 feet long, more a carnival ride than a transportation system. For Walt Disney World, though, Imagineers scaled up the monorail to provide serious transportation.
Walt Disney World, we needed a longer train. So we took basically what I call the original Mark III design that we put into service here in 1968, and we made it wider and we made it longer, and I designed a new body to go on that train that had this sort of Learjet sweeping windshield look to it.
In 1990, the monorail was upgraded again.
It's a fiberglass composite body on a steel frame. And the fiberglass body is built under the same premise as an aircraft body. So the entire body itself, without any equipment on it, weighs about 800 pounds because the weight was a big consideration. They didn't want to increase the weight, but they wanted to increase the capacity, and that's how they did it with the composite bodies.
The new fleet of 12 trains, each made up of 6 cars, increased capacity by 30%. The monorail now carries 50 million people a year. Unlike most conventional trains, which have a single locomotive that pulls all the other cars, each of the monorail trains contains 8 electrical motors, putting out 113 horsepower apiece. They're powered by a 600-volt DC electrical system, which feeds current through an electrified metal bar running the length of the beamway.
It's a large toy electric train. So it picks up power off the beam and powers DC motors.
It's certainly the most expensive toy train in the world. Building the high-tech, high-rise system cost a staggering $1 million per mile for the 14-mile route. And that's in 1970s dollars. Part of the route runs directly through the lobby of the Contemporary Hotel. But the monorail slips in and out so quietly that the hundreds of guests are never disturbed. Try that with a diesel locomotive. Daily servicing takes place in the monorail maintenance facility.
We actually have 3 sections in the shop called dropout beams, one on beam 1 and one on beam 10. It's actually pieces of beam that scissor down, drop out, and we can roll them out of the way so we can service items under the train.
Because of the continuous preventive maintenance, the monorail is amazingly reliable.
We run at about 99.9% efficiency. On our bad months or bad weeks, we run about 99.8%.
Since Walt Disney World first opened, the monorail has hauled over 1 billion riders, making the system the most heavily used monorail in the world.
Worked out to be a very slick system, looked like the future, still looks like the future.
While the monorail is a Disney adaptation of long-existing technology, one of its newest rides is a brand new concept, invented with the aid of an old director set. The concrete monorail beams were manufactured in Washington State and shipped by rail to Florida. Modern Marvels, Walt Disney World, will return in a moment. High-tech transportation abounds at Epcot. The monorail, test track driving, even a trip into outer space. But one of its newest rides uses high-tech motion-based technology to give people a chance to experience something considerably lower tech. Hang gliding.
A sensation that is almost like free flight. It is such a unique experience.
We were able to tell a pretty compelling flight story with fairly high technology and some illusions that are quite unique.
Strapped into bench seats, guests are lifted 40 feet into the air and immersed in a movie shot while hang gliding over California. They feel the breeze, smell the scents, bob and soar with the wind. It's a stunning combination of movie and ride technology. But the project almost died on the drawing board. Disney Imagineers knew they could make a great movie. After all, they'd been in the movie business for decades. The real challenge was in engineering the ride.
One idea was, if you think of going to your dry cleaners and when your clothes go by on a moving rack, we were going to do something like that where you'd be in a flying harness and sort of suspended and moving along.
Most of the early concepts involved multiple floors of a building. Maybe we'd have 3 floors. And we would take people up there, put them in this ride vehicle, and somehow move them horizontally out above the screen. The more we studied that, it sort of became very cumbersome because we have to move people up and down stairs or elevators or escalators all day long. And frankly, it was about to sink the attraction. We decided, it's just not going to pencil out.
Then, over Thanksgiving weekend, Imagineer Mark Sumner had an idea. To test it, he dug out one of his childhood toys.
It was an old erector set. And I pulled it down out of the attic and blew off the dust and started going through the pieces. And I thought, there's probably enough pieces here to make a little representation of what I want to demonstrate. So I started putting it together with some string and some wire ties and some hot glue. Over a period of about 3 hours in my garage, I put a little erector set model together.
Back at work on Monday, he sprang his idea on the planning team.
So I put this model on the table. I said, how about if we load people here in 3 rows, and then we'll have an electric motor that can then move them up into the screen area. And while they're up there, since we already have this motor, maybe we can move them around, maybe we can swing them back and forth a little bit, and when they're done, we can simply bring them back down to a normal theater environment and let them leave.
And that's just what they did on a much, much bigger scale.
It takes about 1 million pounds of steel just in the ride system to make it work. But it works just like this. I don't have to turn a crank on the big one. I don't think I could, but we have electric motors that can do that. These are 1,000 horsepower electric motors and gears that produce a situation where we've got 50 people or so on one lift mechanism that are sitting out on the end of a big arm that's connected to a big device that moves in and out.
But the heavy-duty engineering is all about ultra-light flight.
We want them to have that feeling that they're really flying on a hang gliding experience, that they're not on a 30-ton monster that's moving them up into the air.
To enhance the realism of the ride, to plus it, as Walt used to say, they added subtle touches like wind and scent to match the movie scenery.
So what we ended up with was this aluminum wing. It's built much like an airplane wing that is raised when you set down, but then just before you lift off, it comes down. Built into that for each guest is a variable speed fan, and it's actually behind them and it's very quiet. And inside the wing, we've designed these air chambers that actually bring it around to the front and will blow wind in your face. We can vary the wind pressure to match the scene. When we decided to add the scents, to add a little extra, we found out that we could take our scent boxes. We have mechanisms that will inject scents, and we actually inject that into each of the fans. So it's not like it's overbearing, it just sort of is in the wind like it would be if you were actually hang gliding.
Now it's one of the most popular rides at Epcot.
You can go to a movie, you can go on a ride. How often do you combine the two?
Night after night, 365 days a year, Walt Disney World explodes with fireworks. In fact, the resort is the world's largest consumer of fireworks, burning through roughly 1 million shells a year. At Epcot, the nightly fireworks show fires off 1,105 individual shells.